We are still in the planning processes, and obviously consultations with Congress as well as the international community are very important. You know, my preference obviously would have been that the international community already acted forcefully. But what we have seen, so far at least, is an incapacity at this point for the Security Council to move forward in the face of a clear violation of international norms. And you know, I recognize that all of us here in the United States, in Great Britain, and many parts of the world, there is a certain weariness given Afghanistan. There's a certain suspicion of any military action post-Iraq, and I very much appreciate that. On the other hand, it's important for us to recognize that when over 1,000 people are killed, including hundreds of innocent children, through the use of a weapon that 98 or 99% of humanity says should not be used even in war, and there is no action, then we're sending a signal that that international norm doesn't mean much. And that is a danger to our national security. And obviously, if and when we make a decision to respond, there are a whole host of considerations that I have to take into account too, in terms of how effective it is, and given the kinds of options that we're looking at that would be very limited and would not involve a long-term commitment or a major operation. You know, we are confident that we can provide Congress all the information and get all the input that they need, and we're very mindful of that. And we can have serious conversations with our allies and our friends around the world about this. But ultimately, we don't want the world to be paralyzed. And frankly, you know, part of the challenge that we end up with here is that a lot of people think something should be done, but nobody wants to do it. And that's not an unusual situation, and that's part of what allows, over time, the erosion of these kinds of international prohibitions, unless somebody says, no, when the world says we're not going to use chemical weapons, we mean it. And it would be tempting to leave it to others to do it. And I think I've shown consistently and said consistently my strong preference for multilateral action whenever possible. But it is not in the national security interest of the United States to ignore clear violations of these kinds of international norms. And the reason is because there are a whole host of international norms out there that are very important to us. You know, we have currently rules in place dealing with the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. We have international norms that have been violated by certain countries, and the United Nations has put sanctions in place. But if there's a sense that over time nobody's willing actually to enforce them, then people don't take them seriously. So, you know, I am very clear that the world generally is war weary. Certainly, the United States it has gone through over a decade of war. The American people understandably want us to be focused on the business of rebuilding our economy here and putting people back to work. And I assure you, nobody ends up being more war-weary than me. But what I also believe is that part of our obligation as a leader in the world is making sure that when you have a regime that is willing to use weapons that are prohibited by international norms on their own people, including children, that they are held to account.